are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I am Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Israeli military forces have taken control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt. Meanwhile, delegations from Israel and Hamas arrived in Cairo to resume talks on a proposed deal for a ceasefire just hours after Israeli troops were seized into Rafah and seized control of the border. Meanwhile, Indian students are refraining from joining the US protests spread across university campuses with the fear of visa revocation. And AstraZeneca is withdrawing their COVID-19 vaccine globally. India has hit out at Canada over the Nagar Kirtan parade that allegedly featured a Khalistani float in Malton and urged Ottawa to stop providing criminal elements a safe haven and political space in their country. Fugitive businessman Nirav Modi, who has been in prison in London for over 5 years, made a new bail application which was rejected by a UK judge who ruled that he continued to pose a substantial risk of absconding justice. Maldives Foreign Minister Musa Zamir will visit India on the 9th of May in the first high-level trip after the Maldives pro-China President Mohammad Muizzu assumed office. After being scrapped 2 hours before launch, Boeing now aims to launch the Starliner's first crewed mission no earlier than Friday.
Okay, here's Soyuz.
Well, our big focus, the Israeli army has seized and closed the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, which has functioned as the main method that humanitarian aid enters the strip for the duration of the war. As a result now, Gaza has been effectively cut off from humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, a delegation of officials arrived in Cairo to resume ceasefire talks after Mr. Netanyahu said that a proposal previously agreed to by Hamas falls far short of Israel's expectations. This, as the Israeli Defense Minister insists that Israel will deepen its push into Rafah if negotiations fail. Here are the details.
Israel has commenced its planned military offense by seizing the Gazan side of Rafah. This comes just hours after Hamas accepted an Egyptian and Qatari-mediated ceasefire proposal, which aimed at ending the nearly 7-month-long war.
This is a major move in the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. Rafah was the one point where a lot of that aid had come through into Gaza. It was also the one point where people trying to flee the war were able to cross into Egypt.
The attack on Rafah comes after Israel rejected the deal accepted by Hamas for not meeting the country's core demands. Israel had said it would send a delegation to meet the negotiators in an attempt to reach an agreement. At least 23 Palestinians, including 6 women and 5 children as young as 3 years old, have been killed by Israeli airstrikes on Gaza's southernmost city where 1.4 million Palestinians were taking refuge. Israeli allies had urged for restraint. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he was deeply concerned about a possible offense in Rafah. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden stressed opposition during a phone call with the Israeli Prime Minister. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has also expressed that his government does not support any Israeli intervention in Rafah.
We've said very clearly, and the Foreign Minister has said, that we do not support the intervention into Rafah, that we're concerned about the humanitarian impact. Palestinians were told to move south in Gaza towards Rafah. The concern which is there is for a loss of innocent life, and we've made our position clear, as has the United States, as have all of our partners.
More than 1 million displaced Palestinians stay in tents and overcrowded apartments in Rafah after having fled the Israeli military's offense in other parts of the Gaza Strip.
وهي رمى علينا مناشير واحنا الحين بدنا ننزح، لا اخذنا معنا مصاري ولا أواعي ولا شيء، هينا نازحين زي ما احنا. قالوا انزحوا معاكم على خان يونس، على دير البلح، على السلطان، انزحوا وين ما بدكم، بس حي الجنين السلام كله برازيل كله هذا قصف. وانا شاردة انا واولادي الستة ومش عارفة وين بدي اروح لحتى الان.
For NDTV, this is Samia Afsar.
Meanwhile, the United States has played down the deadly Israeli assault on Rafah, saying the offensive appears to be limited, despite concerns over the fate of the more than 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in the southern Gaza city. The US State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters that the US still opposes a major Israel offensive against Rafah. In fact, Matthew Miller also argues that the attack on the crossing does not look like the prelude to a larger offensive.
This appears to be a limited operation, but of course much of that depends on what comes next. They have said, I think quite clearly, it's no secret that they want to conduct a major military operation there. We have made clear that we oppose such an operation. And separately, but of course it's related, we are trying to achieve an agreement that would bring an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages.
Well, joining us for further clarity, Kate Fisher from Washington, D.C. at the moment. Thanks so much, Kate, for joining us with a live update. A Hamas spokesperson has said that the ball is now in Netanyahu's court and that the US must exert greater pressure on Israel to bring the war to an end.
Yeah, that's right. It is now at this crucial stage where the Israelis have gone on the ground into Rafah, something that the US has said they did not want to see happen. Yes, the US is saying it is a small operation and it doesn't look like, in their eyes, the prelude to something larger, but there clearly is concern in Washington that that is exactly what it could be. We've just hearing here this evening in Washington that in fact the US has delayed 2 arms shipments to Israel, and that is the first such delay that we've heard of since the October the 7th attacks by Hamas. But up until now, the US has surged thousands of weapons to the Israelis, but we understand due to some reporting here in the US, the Associated Press, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, saying that 2 shipments have been delayed. Now, they're not shipments that were due to be delivered in the next day or so, but they have been delayed. The State Department not giving a rationale for that at the moment, but it does, one senior official saying that this is a shot across the bow to try to underscore to the Israelis just how much the US does not agree with any plans to launch a full-scale ground invasion of Rafah. Of course, the Biden administration has been very clear about that, repeating over and over again that they do not think that is how the Israelis should continue. But Benjamin Netanyahu so far has not agreed to it. And of course, I think there are people in Washington concerned by the fact that they have made these small inroads into the city of Rafah, taking over, for example, that border crossing with Egypt.
Right, Kate, also Politico is reporting that the Biden administration has indefinitely delayed the release of a State Department report on whether Israel is violating international law in Gaza, and the administration gave no reason for this last-minute change.
Absolutely, that is another development that is happening this evening. We understand that there was going to be this report about whether any Israeli officials should be pursued legally for their role in the invasion, in the conflicts in Gaza. That report was due to be published tomorrow, Wednesday, here in the US. It's still Tuesday evening here. But we're told now that that report has been delayed. And as you say, we've not been given any reason as to why that is. The State Department saying it will not be a long delay, perhaps less than a week before it comes out. But it is certainly raising questions as to why this delay has suddenly occurred, especially when we're at this very this kind of crossroads where Israel has begun a small incursion into Rafah, something which of course the US has pointedly said it does not want to happen, and now we have a delay of this report which could reveal whether the US believes Israel has broken any international law in their conduct.
Kate, as always, thank you so much for joining us with that crucial live update from Washington. Meanwhile, a wave of anxiety and uncertainty is sweeping across the Indian student community in the United States, the second largest international student group there after the Chinese, as they watch their peers on campus grappling with disciplinary action, suspension, as well as arrests. But they shoulder another additional burden: the threat of visa revocation and expulsion. There is widespread concern on multiple fronts. Indian students participating in protests have been detained. Those not protesting are also in a spot, with some facing a switch to online classes for some time.
Watch out, this van's backing up, guys.
Right, joining us for further clarity, Sudhanshu Kaushik at the moment, who's the founder of the North American Association of Indian Students. Sudhanshu joins us live from New York at the moment. Thanks, Sudhanshu. You know, we are hearing that many Indian students are torn between diving headfirst into the pro-Palestinian movement on campus and the weight of what's at stake. Is that the ground reality?
Hi, Parmeshwar. Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely. I think that international students, specifically Indian international students on F1 visas, are always in a precarious situation. It's not just a decision for them to join ethically and morally protest on campus. It's about, what are the repercussions, and repercussions that stand larger than just being arrested or being detained by police. There's another variable at play. And I think this time around, during the protests against and for the Palestinian occupation on both sides, actually, there's another layer added to it. We saw protests happen before. If you remember, during 2020, during the height of COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement really picked up at U.S. universities and colleges and campuses. And this kind of concern was there already. We were in the neck deep of that because students wanted to, especially international students from India, wanted to express solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, but they were fearful of taking part, visibly being at the protest, offline, online, because of the fear of the student's visa kind of being revoked. At that time, I think the fear was a little bit misplaced because universities actively were not targeting students. They weren't arresting them, especially not on campus. You had very few reports of students who were protesting peacefully and in line that were arrested. Absolutely not. Even during, a pandemic scare that was going on, schools mostly were shut. In this case, what we're seeing is kind of interesting, a little bit fearful, is that students are being proactively targeted and arrested, regardless of if the protest becomes kind of violent or not, harmful or not.
In fact, some students are also complaining that an expulsion or a detention would have an impact on the F1 visa of any international student. But Sudhanshu, many students who are in the US, they believe that whatever their politics, joining the protest on any side opens them up to consequences like you are highlighting, especially given their financial dependence on loans or, let's say, aid from the university.
Right. I mean, it's a concern for all international students, as the past 5-6 years have shown that international students now are one of the largest international student demographics. Most of them, whom, by the way, do come on loans and external sources rather than scholarship and funding. So it is another layer of concern. And what I was getting to is that the concern right now is exactly what you're saying, that it's not just the fear of arrest that looms. Arrest is maybe a second issue, and while it might seem more fearful, and here's kind of the devious thing that's happening. While the arrest is a very, very intense kind of being detained situation, it does not, and I say in quotations, it does not affect your student visa at its current state as much. There are many examples where students have been arrested, but it doesn't impact their student visa. Right? Unless it's something that's very, very heinous and then etc. What's the concern right now is that universities are suspending students. Now, thankfully, the Department of Homeland Services has gone on record and it is said that 0 suspensions of their or revocation of Indian students or general, anyone international student has been made. But the fact that a university is handing out suspension, many universities across America, everywhere, and for an international student, you then have basically 21 days for then the university to report to the Department of Homeland Services. And then you have 15 days to leave if you A, cannot transfer to another institution, or B, you can't take a full credit course. And that is the real kind of
grave consequences indeed, Sudhanshu, as you are highlighting. Campus disruptions due to the tension surrounding the war in Gaza have left Indian students in the US and their parents anxious. But Sudhanshu, thank you so much for joining us with an update on the ground reality.
Thanks for having me.
In other crucial news, AstraZeneca says it has initiated the worldwide withdrawal of its COVID-19 vaccine. The company claims this is due to a surplus of available updated vaccines since the pandemic, but the European Commission has already withdrawn the marketing authorization to AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine on the company's request. Now, as per reports, the Anglo-Swedish drug maker has previously admitted in court documents that the vaccine causes side effects such as blood clots and low blood platelet counts. The firm's application to withdraw the vaccine was actually made on the 5th of March and came into effect on the 7th of May as far as the European Union is concerned. Switching tracks, days after a pro-Khalistan rally in Canada depicted an effigy of the Indian Prime Minister, India has called upon the Canadian government to stop providing criminal elements a safe haven and political space. Now, this comes after the Canadian police said over the weekend that they have arrested 3 Indian nationals, all male in their 20s, on the charge of murder. India has hit out at Canada after Khalistan floats were seen in Moulton, saying that democratic countries should not allow intimidation by radical elements in the name of freedom of expression. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has been tracking the latest updates for us. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, Canada is once again being accused by the Indian government of giving criminals a safe haven. Take us through the Ministry of External Affairs' response to this matter.
See, one crisis after the another. Just last week, the Deputy High Commissioner of Canada was summoned by the Ministry of External Affairs over an issue where Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, was seen sharing a stage with people who raised Khalistani slogans. And just day before yesterday on Sunday, Ontario Gurdwara Committee held a Nagar Kirtan program where floats and posters showing Indian leaders in objectionable condition, like Indian Prime Minister behind the bars, Indian diplomats' pictures were used in that Nagar Kirtan, derogatory comments were issued against Indian diplomats and politicians, and that is why the Ministry of External Affairs has yet again condemned this entire incident and has raised objection over Canada giving a space to all these secessionist and extremist ideas and people who harbor such ideas. So in a very categorical manner, yet again, India has objected to Canada for giving a space to such people, such ideologies, and also reprimanded them for this entire incident, saying that yet again, if Canada continues to give a space to such elements, it will only hamper India-Canada relations in the long run.
As always, Ghazali, thanks so much for joining us with that update. Well, news and updates continue in a moment, right after this very short break. Welcome back. Several countries around the world are now making their immigration laws tougher. This is in response to a growing anti-immigrant sentiment and resurgence of right-leaning tendencies. But how much will this hurt Indians? And is this trend here to stay? NDTV's Gauri Dwivedi decodes.
In the last few months, UK, France, Canada, New Zealand, Australia have all toughened their immigration laws, and all have done so with the same purpose: to reduce the influx of immigrants and check possible misuse of their law. So how does this impact Indians, and why is this trend likely to grow? Let's decode. Now, in February 2024, many undocumented workers in France were out on the streets protesting changes in the country's immigration laws that disadvantaged them and reduced their chances of possible citizenship rights. While the law was struck down on technicalities by the Constitutional Council, it marked the beginning of a clear shift towards right-leaning tendencies around the world that are now advocating for tighter immigration laws. Since then, the UK has toughened its laws, making it far more difficult for students to get in family members by increasing the family income criteria. They will also need to now have a better job with a higher salary bracket. Australia has brought in stringent requirements related to proficiency in English language and higher financial thresholds. Taking cue, neighbouring New Zealand also brought in higher standards for English, besides reducing the total stay period from 5 years to 3 years. Now, part of the problem is that immigration is a highly sensitive and political issue, and record levels of immigration have only made matters more tricky for these governments. And add to this the issue of illegal immigrants, which continues to increase. In fact, in 2024 US presidential election, immigration is one of the most polarizing issues. Arrests for illegal border crossings into the US was at record levels in December 2023, and cities like New York and Chicago are now unable to provide even basic services to thousands of immigrants that are crossing the border from states like Texas. As for the European Union, lack of a coordinated response or policy is a result of lack of consensus on opening or closing of borders, on imposition of quotas, or creating a proper system of admission of immigrants. Disagreements within the EU are also a result of the economic disparities within the group, where on one side there are countries like Germany that propel economic growth for the entire grouping and feel that they cannot pay for liberal policies of countries that do not have commensurate economic might. Now, the argument against immigrants is that they eat into the jobs of citizens. But in 2022, only 9.93 million non-EU citizens were employed in the labour market, out of a total of 193 million persons aged between 20 to 64. This is just 5% of the total. Now, in terms of occupations, most number of non-EU citizens were employed either as helpers or cleaners. Now, right-wing parties that are critical of immigration have entered governments in Austria, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Poland and Slovakia, and are now impacting the continent's politics. The French law championed by a liberal government is testimony that right-wing tendencies will make immigration a major political issue across most Western governments. Indians form a very large part of immigrants that are seeking better education and better job prospects overseas, but will now have to brace themselves for tougher times ahead as these tendencies are likely to grow and more stringent visa requirements are installed.